So these last two gifts in 1 Corinthians 12 go together seamlessly. That's why they're introduced together. It was translated from the original Greek that the Apostle Paul wrote in all the way into English as the gift of tongues. And if you don't know Bible history, if you don't know the gifts of the Spirit, that word tongues might throw you off, right? Because it's like, that's weird. And I know it shouldn't have been translated that way, but I get it. They use this literal translation of tongues. It actually means just a gift of unknown language. It's an unknown language that you speak out. And it's the different kinds of languages. And so the first time we really see this open up is in Acts chapter 2, this particular gift. It was the day of Pentecost, the Holy Spirit has come. And if you read in Acts chapter 2, it says that all of them were in one accord, worshiping God. And all of a sudden, they had what looked like tongues of fire above their head. And they began to speak in unknown languages. So they're speaking in languages, all kinds of different languages that they don't understand. Well, where they're at culturally is they are in a room that would have been in a major kind of metropolitan area where people would come from all kinds of different countries and backgrounds and different languages, and they would come barter and they would build businesses. And so as they're doing this, the Bible records that there were people on the streets that are like, man, these people are drunk. And Peter stands up, one of Jesus' disciples, and he says, we're not drunk on wine like you think. It's only like 10 a.m. in the morning. He said, we're actually just received the gift of the Holy Spirit. And people began to listen to what they were saying. And people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different ethnicities began to say, I hear them preaching in my language. So what we read about here is the gift of different languages, or the gift of tongues, where a group of 120 people are all speaking in all these different earthly languages, and the people outside are hearing the gospel message through those people in their native tongues. Those people didn't know how to speak those languages, but because of the empowerment of the Holy Spirit in that moment, the gift of tongues, the gift of that unknown language, was released, and they were able to minister. Now, in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, he also says the gift of interpretation. In this context, he's talking about when a group of people are coming together in corporate worship, that one of them may have a word in an unknown language. Someone else, for the sake of clarity, so that everyone can be encouraged, needs to interpret that, but not just willy-nilly. Like, it needs to be an interpretation that is under the influence of the Holy Spirit. And I've experienced this a few times in my life, and I'll be honest, it's still a little bit like, whoa, that's cool and a little strange at the same time. But I remember being in a meeting with a bunch of pastors. There's like 150 of us, and we're having this worship time, and the music begins to stop, and the man who was supposed to be giving the speech stops, and he says, I believe that there's someone here who has a word for us, and I want you to speak it out. And someone began to speak in, I don't know, Greek. I don't know what it was. Like, it was just some language. It could have been an angelic language. I don't know. But it was maybe about 2 minutes long. It was pretty long, to be honest. And we're all just kind of sitting there. And almost immediately, someone else, other side of the room, begins to speak up. And it's like the timing of both of these were very, very close. It was not like this person over here interpreted it as a 15-minute speech. It wasn't, or it wasn't 5 seconds. But man, in the room, what they interpreted glorified God, encouraged everybody in the room. It was a beautiful thing. It's not something we experience on the daily. But the reason why the Apostle Paul said there needs to be one person who speaks in that unknown language as the Holy Spirit does. In other words, he's not always going to, but if he chooses to, and then one person interprets, is because in the Corinthian church, all of them were speaking in tongues, all at the same time. And he records in chapter 14 of 1 Corinthians, he says, listen, if an unbeliever comes in and all of you are speaking this unknown language under the influence of the Holy Spirit and no one's interpreting, what good is that for anybody? Because they'll never know what you're saying. And that gift of an unknown language is not meant to make you feel good or spiritually elite. It's meant to minister to others. So there always needs to be one person speaking in that unknown language, one other person interpreting, so everyone can receive the word that the Holy Spirit has. Now you might be asking yourself, all right, I hear you. Makes sense, kind of. But why would the Holy Spirit do it that way? Why not just get up and preach? Well, as someone who's been preaching for over 12 years now and does it every single week, I can tell you there are people who I love, have been a part of our church for years, and they still don't listen to me when I preach in English. And so I bet the Holy Spirit says, hey, you want a wake-up call? Let me show you a supernatural way to reach these people. Here is a gift of an unknown language, whether that be an earthly language, whether it be a heavenly language. Here's an interpretation. And when you see that this interpretation turns into, watch this, from a gift of an unknown language to an interpretation, it then becomes prophecy so that we can be strengthened, encouraged, and comforted by the words that God has for the people in the room that day. So I want to encourage you, don't be afraid of these gifts, but understand that the Holy Spirit works in order. He works in decency and in order. And so if you ever are in an environment where that happens, don't freak out. Be patient. Listen, and listen for what the Holy Spirit wants to speak to the congregation, to the people in that room, because I guarantee you, it's going to be a word of prophecy that will encourage, strengthen, and comfort you and glorify Jesus.